Hi there, Tara. How are you?
Good morning, Richard. It's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's great to have you as well. And I'm super excited and grateful for the team at Miller Inc. for connecting us. Always super to be connected to folks like yourself. I'm excited to talk to you. I live in Massachusetts, as you may be aware, and I know you're on the other side of the country. But actually, our governor, Maura Healey, just gave her State of the Commonwealth address last night. And I watched it. It was televised. And one of the major, she has three major tenants that she's outlining. And one of them is housing. That is one, the other is childcare, and the third is public transportation. So she's very focused on, the public service aspects of her administration. But it's extremely interesting to have her. It's extremely
There's the cat.
interesting. There's the cat, to have her talk about housing, right, as a primary consideration of her administration. So I'm excited to talk to you today and juxtapose a little bit about like what I heard last night about Massachusetts, what you're working with in California. But before we jump into all of that, would you just give us a little brief overview of you, Tara, and a little bit about the Community Corporation of Santa Monica?
Sure, sounds good. And
Yeah,
yes, I'm excited to dive into all those topics you just mentioned.
yeah.
So I am the Executive Director of Community Corp of Santa Monica, which is a nonprofit that was founded in 1982 by
Wow.
community leaders who are concerned about gentrification in
Hmm.
Santa Monica. For those
Hmm.
who aren't familiar with Santa Monica, it's I would say, medium-sized
Yeah.
city on the coast of California, Southern California, in LA County.
Yep.
And I would describe it as one of the most expensive parts of Southern California.
Yeah.
So I personally have been in the affordable housing space since I graduated in 1999.
Hmm.
And so I've had a few different places I've worked, and I've gotten to see affordable housing being built around California. So that's
Hmm.
been a really interesting journey for me personally. And I've certainly learned a lot about the dynamics of different communities and opinions about affordable housing. So happy to talk about that. But back to Community Corp. So since we were founded, we've built over 2,000 affordable homes
Wow.
in Santa Monica and also now outside of Santa Monica. It's
Mm.
about 95 buildings. So our mission specifically is improving lives in neighborhoods. And the way
Mm.
we do that is by providing affordable housing in what we call high resource neighborhoods. And that just basically means neighborhoods that have, good quality transit, which means, frequency,
Yep.
reliability, as well as employment opportunities, like a different array of employment opportunities,
Hmm.
as well as highly rated, good quality schools.
Mm.
And in my time building affordable housing, I've certainly seen different approaches that different nonprofits and for-profits take. And when I came to Community Corp 7 years ago, I wasn't really sure how I was going to, like this
Mm.
approach in particular, but I have to say I've really bought into it. So
Mm.
the idea of building affordable housing in high resource neighborhoods is a few different things that I really think are important for listeners to understand. So first of all, it provides access to neighborhoods that would be unaffordable otherwise.
Sure.
So that includes both socioeconomically and culturally. So,
Mm.
a lot of areas gentrify over time and end up turning into white affluent enclaves. And we certainly
Right.
have that here in Southern California. So one
Sure.
of the things I most appreciate about this strategy is that Santa Monica is a better city because affordable housing is part of it.
Right.
There's people of all different cultural backgrounds, all different socioeconomic backgrounds, and it really just creates much more of a diverse and interesting fabric, in my opinion, and from what I've seen. People
Mm.
learn from each other and appreciate each other. So I think that part is really great. Obviously, for the person who gets the access to a high resource neighborhood that they normally wouldn't, it's a game changer. I
Sure.
can't tell you how many people I've talked to that are so grateful that they
Hmm.
can live in a place where their kids can go to a really good school. And
Right.
obviously, this is part of the long game strategy is to hopefully help those kids who get better access to education to be able to have better circumstances, to get higher
Right.
paying jobs, lift themselves out of poverty. So, so that's the intention behind building in these particular neighborhoods. There's not a lot of people focused on it, but I hope there will be in the future. So, we built, like I said, 94 buildings in Santa Monica that we own and operate. So we are a long-term owner, and that makes a big difference too. And then we have our first building in the city of LA in the Mar Vista neighborhood, which is also considered a high resource neighborhood. It's been gentrifying, and now it's considered a higher resource neighborhood. So that's a little bit about us.
Yeah, that's fabulous. You've got like over 20 years of experience in affordable housing development. And you said you've mentioned that you've been with community for 7 years now. Is that what you said?
Mhm.
Wow, that's great. Um, I was going to specifically ask you about the 2,000 units of affordable housing that you kind of have developed across the LA area. What are some of your other responsibilities in addition to that, Tara, as the executive director of Community Corporation?
So my role specifically is not only to oversee all the different areas of the organization in terms of,
Hmm.
how we're developing our properties, also how we're operating them. Operations is
Hmm.
a huge part of our work. Just the
Sure.
day-to-day maintenance of our buildings, making sure we're
Yeah.
collecting rents, addressing
Mm,
all our residents' needs. We also have services programs that I can dive
mm,
into a little more because there's some specific things we're trying to accomplish there.
sure.
So, I act as sort of the caretaker, if you will, of the nonprofit. And I look at myself as someone who needs to support each of the directors of those divisions that
Mm,
have specific goals that they're trying to meet.
mm.
In addition to that, a lot of my work has focused around advocacy, so
Okay.
policy change, both locally and state legislation, and I can certainly talk a little bit about that. Um,
Sure.
so many of us practitioners, we do spend time advocating and working on policy. That's not part of our sort of paycheck part of the job, but it's really important in terms of, making sure we can do the work we need to do and not make it excessively difficult. So,
Mhm.
so it is really important that we all stay engaged and focused. And then I also do a lot of work in the community. So I'm the one at all the community meetings talking to residents about why this building is going here.
Sure.
That's always interesting.
Sure.
Get lots of mixed reviews and reception, and we have to work through it. So a lot of
Sure.
my work is education, both at these community meetings as well as doing things like tours.
Mm.
So, I feel like one of my roles is to make sure people learn about affordable housing and appreciate it. So that's why I'm actually here today because I, really want to try to get the
Sure.
message
Get
out
that
to
message.
people.
Yeah,
What is
absolutely.
it and who's in it, and try to
Hmm.
break down some of the misconceptions that we all run into constantly.
Did want to ask you about some of that from a misconception perspective because this is a critical issue in so many communities. And I mentioned to you that I watched our State of the State here in Massachusetts last night, and our governor is specifically talking about affordable housing and even using terminology like affordable housing crisis and sort of lots of challenges associated with that. I have to assume, Tara, that there are several challenges that you encounter in your work, right? And you just talked about trying to bring awareness, and there's a stigma, I think, associated with affordable housing, right? So what are some of the strategies, Tara, that you found effective in sort of addressing those stigmas and those other challenges?
Well, I would say it's definitely still a work in progress.
Mm,
Sometimes you can make progress, but I don't know if I would call it effective because there's still
mm,
so much to do. There's still
right.
so many misperceptions and
Mm,
pushback, and you find it everywhere. So,
mm,
but the things that I do try to do, first of all, is listen.
yep,
So, every time we build a project or a building in a community, we don't make any assumptions that we understand the needs of the community.
right.
That's really important, is to go in as kind of a blank slate and listen. Even in Santa Monica, we have a variety of different types of neighborhoods with different issues. So, always going in and listening. So our community meetings, over the years, I've learned how best to structure them to get most receptivity. And that is to really only leave about 15 minutes of presentation and like an hour or an hour and a half of listening
Questions.
and
Yeah.
question answering,
Yeah.
because that's
Yeah.
really what people want. People have questions. Most of them are legitimate. Some I would just kind of put out more in the NIMBY category, but I try to address those as best as I can too.
Mm,
So I would say listening is the first one, trying to
mm,
understand, right? Why is this going to impact you negatively, and what can we do to solve it? So
Yeah.
I also try to outline to people the things that I may be able to change and the ones that I can't. So for
Right.
example, I'll go to a meeting, there might be 50 or 100 people who are upset that we're building a building there. And I'll say, okay, we're a nonprofit, our mission is providing affordable housing. That I can't change.
Right.
But what I can change is the placement of the windows, the placement of the
Mm,
driveways, the
mm,
style, the design, the
hmm.
colors.
Hmm.
So let's talk about what are the things you're going to be looking at this building. What are the things we
Sure.
can do to make it better for you? So, and then the other thing I'll say is like the tours are really effective. A lot of times, if people come to see one of our buildings, and in particular, if they can talk to some of our residents, it really makes a big
Really
difference.
helps. Yeah.
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 Now,
So those,
yeah.
I was gonna say those
Mhm.
those tours are not just, so those tours are to get the community a better understanding of what's happening, right? That's what we're talking
Right.
about. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, we've certainly done them by request for groups, and sometimes
Gotcha.
say if we're building a new community and people don't know who we are, I'll say, come
Mm,
see one of our buildings. So we'll do kind
mm,
of neighborhood specific ones. Sometimes we'll do open house, anybody who wants to come. Sometimes a private group will just say, hey, can we come see your buildings? So we do all different kinds.
mm.
The other thing I'll say is that, we do try to provide factual information.
Right.
Now that goes back to my thing that I said earlier about being
Yeah.
effective, because sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't, but
Sure.
we're
Sure.
still obviously going to continue to do that. One
Mm,
of the major misconceptions, for example, we get is that it lowers your property values if there's
right.
an affordable
Oh yeah, I
housing.
hear that over and over again. The affordable housing is going to
Yeah.
drive down my property value, so I don't
Right.
want it. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, yes,
Yeah.
exactly. I would say
Yeah.
probably 95% of the time, that's one of the issues at
Right.
every uh, community meeting. And it's simply not true. There's,
Mm,
multiple studies done by reputable universities like Harvard.
mhm.
They don't prove that at all. They
Right.
usually say it's either neutral or positive. Certainly,
Mm,
if Santa Monica is a case study for that, we have 95 buildings, and
right.
yet the housing prices are through the roof. Home ownership
Sure.
prices have tripled, quadrupled, or more. So certainly there's no negative
Yeah,
impact
I mean, so
in Santa
there's
Monica.
nothing. Yeah, Southern California, certainly Santa Monica, certainly Los Angeles area are some of the most expensive areas to live in, right?
Right.
And housing prices continue to go up. Here in the northeast of Boston, same thing, right? Our housing prices continue to go up, right?
Yeah.
Talk to me a little bit about, the notion of housing first, right? So I certainly have talked with some folks who are working as advocates for veterans or unhoused, and really talk about, until you can solve the housing problem, you can't really focus on other areas that also may be challenges for individuals. So is that something that the Community Corporation of Santa Monica also kind of abides by, is this notion of housing first?
Well, homelessness isn't our primary
Prime, is
priority,
it?
I guess I would
Okay.
say. It's not been our focus.
Mm,
Our origins came from trying to keep people and families housed and
housed. Okay.
to not have to leave, right?
Mm,
So more of like a neighborhood stability strategy, right?
got it. Got it. Thank you.
Um, so we do have people who have experienced homelessness in our buildings, and
Mm,
certainly more over the years because homelessness has increased, particularly in LA.
sure.
So we aren't like deeply expert at, housing first or how to best
Got
provide
it.
care for people who have experienced that. But I guess I can say that obviously for us, because we have a lot of properties that have been up and operating a long time, there,
Mm,
stability is really important to us. So
hmm.
we do get new, residents who move in. Maybe there's a stable building that's been operating for years and a person coming out of homelessness moves in. So certainly we want to try to help them be successful in that setting and, create a variety of supports and service programs, not only around that person, but around everyone in the building.
Sure. Sure.
Because
Sure.
community type programs benefit everyone, no
Mm,
matter what your experience has been.
mm,
So our lens is a little bit different. We do have a
sure.
building under construction now that will be 40% for people coming out of homelessness or permanent
Oh,
support
wow.
housing.
That,
So, because, we're not really like, a deep case management service provider type
sure.
agency, we'll partner with other ones who are. So,
Mhm.
like there's a group called the People Concern who's been helping homeless individuals transition into, stability for decades. So we're like,
Mm.
well, it obviously makes sense to partner with someone who has that deep expertise. So
Sure,
they'll certainly bring
sure.
their knowledge to this property and other ones where where we may have set asides for this type of need.
No, that's a really important clarification and distinction. Thank you for making that for me. Personally, my wife is very involved here in the north of Boston in the unhoused community. She works with a nonprofit organization that specifically looks to put unhoused people into mostly temporary housing, right? And a lot of times these are individuals who have other issues that need to be worked through as well, whether those be addiction issues or mental health issues or other things. So she's very involved in that organization. Um, I do want to segue a little bit because you talked a little bit about the partnerships, right? Because you said, the work that Community Corporation Santa Monica does isn't deep case management, but you partner with organizations.
Mhm.
You sit on a few boards, Tara. You sit on I noticed the Santa Monica Bay Human Relations Council, AIA Los Angeles, the West Side Urban Forum. How do these roles that occupy, how do they complement the work that you're doing at Community Corporation? What are some of the initiatives that you're involved in through those board memberships?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do
Mm,
feel like it's an important part of my job is to be
mhm,
in the community and in different types of communities,
mm,
and also working in coalition with other
sure.
groups who are all trying to achieve the same thing. So that's why I do serve on a number of different boards. So West Side Urban Forum in particular is a land use type of educational forum
Mm,
to talk about land use issues. So it is quite relevant to the work we do because there is so much pushback from people
right.
about building higher density housing. That's an opportunity for me to help educate. So
Yeah.
that one's great.
Mm,
Same with AIA Los Angeles, which is really a group of architects who are
yeah.
working on perfecting, their craft, and they need people who have the lens of a nonprofit that builds affordable housing to better inform their
Sure.
design work. So,
Sure. I
I try to be a support and a help to other groups who may not be, deep in this field.
Yeah, I found that one particularly interesting when I saw that you were part of AIA. I was like, is that the AIA? Like, I was like, and I was trying to make the connection between, your work in affordable housing and the AIA, right? So
Mhm.
that's exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
of course always a learning opportunity, especially I'm not
Right.
an architect, so I get the
Right.
opportunity
Sure.
to learn and they learn from me. So I think
Mm,
that's great. I just joined the Board of Housing California, which is a
mm,
statewide advocacy organization that sponsors and advocates for legislation to support affordable housing statewide in partnership
mm,
with a number of organizations. So I'm really excited about that. I
mm.
was also on the board of SCAMP for 6 years, which is the Southern California version of that, Southern
Okay.
California Association of Nonprofit Housing.
Wow.
And both of those organizations work to create policy and new legislation to help support our work. So, for
Mm,
example, this last year, we were able to work in coalition to get passed a new bill,
mm.
SB4, which is the Faith and Church Land Act or something. I didn't get the name quite right. But in essence, our group had identified faith-based organizations and churches and educational institutions as
Sure.
potential willing partners. They're landowners, they're mission oriented,
Hmm.
and they all need housing, right?
Hmm.
So, or they want to serve the community by providing housing on their parking lots. So,
Sure.
and that in essence allows affordable housing by right on all these types of properties statewide. So
Mm,
that's an example of the type of work that I do on these boards is to help create those types of policies. So us as practitioners, we can say these are our challenges, right? We're
right.
getting pushback, we're getting projects that are slowed down. They're expensive, they're long. Let's try to fix that.
Sure.
So that's
Sure.
also a lot of my work.
I know in my own city where I live, north of Boston, there are two major affordable housing properties that are underway right now, right? They're both refurbishments of existing properties that were abandoned or sold or what have you, and they're doing the refurbishment. And gosh, there's just, there's a significant need, right? So there's waiting lists and there's application processes, and I'm sure it's of the same caliber in Southern California, if not even larger. How do you work through some of those challenges with the communities that you're serving? Are there specific, success stories or transformations, Tara, that you can share there so people don't lose hope through the process?
It is tough. I will
Mm,
say the demand far exceeds the supply, certainly in
sure.
Southern California. Just in Santa Monica, the city manages the housing waiting list for all the providers, which we are the
Mm.
major one, but there are other ones
There
too.
are
And
others. Sure.
it is a bit of a dismal situation. I think there's
Mm.
over 8,000 people on the waiting list right now.
Wow.
And,
Wow.
our annual turnover is probably less than 100 units a year. So that's
Mm.
that's certainly not a good statistic. When we open a new building, then obviously there's a huge influx of
Sure.
supply, which is great, which is why it's really important to focus on adding new supply.
Mm.
But I personally get people reaching out to me all the time asking, "Hey, how can I get housing?" So I
Sure.
do, sort of informal navigation. Here's how you apply.
Right.
Here's some other options in case you can't wait, or you
Mhm.
need more immediate help, like there's transitional housing or other
Mm.
potential possibilities. So I do that because obviously it's important to me to try to help our community. That's why I'm in this job, right? To
That's why
help,
where you're
right?
doing what you're doing. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Exactly. But certainly we're always looking at, are there policies? I mean, it is a really cumbersome and long process. I mean, I've definitely
Sure.
heard people waiting for years,
Right.
maybe up to even 10 years. People can lose hope. People do get discouraged. And I always tell people, keep the faith. Something will
Yeah.
work out if it's meant to be. I can't tell
Sure.
you the time frame, but just keep on trying. And
Right.
also I tell people to try to be open to different types of possibilities. So for
Yeah.
example, if you're a couple, could you live in a one bedroom instead of a two bedroom?
Right.
Like try
Right.
to, give yourself as much
Some
flexibility. I
versatility.
said,
Yeah.
yeah, or could you live in Mar Vista instead of Santa Monica where the wait list might be
Sure.
shorter, right? Things
Mm.
things like that. I also, try to keep in contact and send them other, housing openings when I remember to, but obviously that gets tricky to
Yeah.
keep
It's a
track of
lot of
all
folks to
that.
manage. 8,000 people is a big waiting list. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And we also try to focus on policy. So Santa Monica has
Mm.
an interesting one called the right to return policy that they
Mm.
established kind of to recompense a little bit for people that were displaced by the construction of the 10 freeway and
Mm.
also the redevelopment of the Civic Center area called Belmar. So quite
Mm.
unique and specific to Santa Monica, but there were, a lot of, in particular, Black and Brown families that were displaced
Sure.
during those events. So they created a program that basically prioritizes those people and puts them at the top of the waiting list.
Mm.
So there are policies and things that can help, and I'd like to see more cities adopt things like that, but
Right.
it
Right.
just takes time.
Sure. One of the things I noticed, again, going back to the State of the Commonwealth address I watched last night here in Massachusetts, is our governor has a lot of ambition, which is wonderful, right? And even though she is the same party as the majority of her legislature, they're all Democrats, right? It's a struggle to balance her ambition with the state's fiscal realities and also what the legislature sees as its, primary concerns and the things that it's interested in. You talked about policy for a second, Tara. As we look at kind of the future of affordable housing and the evolving needs, you talked about, the communities, Black and Brown, putting them higher on the list, or some of the other, changes. But there are so many challenges posed by so many different factors, whether they be socioeconomic, others. What are some of the key sort of future future of affordable housing initiatives that you think need to be put in place?
Well, certainly a lot of us have been studying different models around the
Mm.
world to see if there are things that can be
Yeah,
implemented here.
yeah. I know in like Scandinavian countries, they have some very unique models, right?
Right. Yeah. I
Yeah.
went to Helsinki to do a
Mm.
tour of their social housing program, and they certainly have interesting ideas. I think part of the issue though is like political will really
Yeah,
has to prioritize housing. And
sure.
I see some of that happening, but I still see a disconnect. I see, people speaking about prioritizing it, maybe even taking certain actions, but they don't
Sure.
necessarily fiscally prioritize it. And it's
Mm,
hard. There are so many competing priorities. But
yeah,
if you say you want something, but you can't put any money behind it, then it's really going to be hard to actually make it a true priority. So I think,
sure.
and there, here at least in Southern California, probably Northern as well, there are just those
Mm.
competing political dynamics, right? You may have an elected official who says this is my number one priority, but then you have neighborhood groups working directly in opposition of that by
To that,
trying to
yeah.
create legislation to peel back housing reforms and
Mm.
streamlining bills. I mean, that's happening in California.
Sure.
You might have, high-powered groups like, say, the California Association of Realtors, which is a very powerful group,
I would imagine
you know,
so. Yeah.
talking to and, contributing to campaigns to get what they want
Sure.
versus what they, want, in their minds, which is building affordable housing. And
Mm.
that's always been a challenge is, the struggle between all these kind of competing priorities, competing perspectives.
Sure.
Um,
Sure.
so that would be kind of one main thing is like the political will really has to drastically shift and it
Mm.
has to become the number one priority in all aspects and regardless of who doesn't like it, right?
Sure.
In Finland, for example, Helsinki, they had made this decision 30 years ago that it was going to be a huge priority to have a diverse housing menu. And they bought up 30% of the land in Helsinki and dedicated it to affordable housing.
Yeah.
So they made some drastic decisions.
Mm.
That's going to be hard for a city like LA or Santa Monica even to do at this point, right? A lot of these urban
Mm.
areas are built out. But there is an interesting policy that I saw in Helsinki that I thought that could be implemented, which is requiring all businesses that support construction or anything to do with housing to provide a 20% discount
Oh,
for
wow.
like a certain amount of their business, and it has to be for affordable housing. So like
Mm.
there certainly are things. The problem is, do you think the business community is going to like that? Absolutely
No.
not, right? So it goes back to these
Yeah.
competing priorities, but there's definitely things that could be done if it really truly was a priority.
That's interesting, and I'm glad we were able to talk a little bit about Helsinki and Finland, and I know from some of the things I've seen on the internet, on television, et cetera, that they are taking such a unique approach to housing in the Scandinavian countries. And I know it's different and their tax structures are different. And it's not, there's, to your point, the political will or, the prioritization, like we talked about before, like, the governor may have one set of initiatives or priorities, but the legislature may have another set of initiatives and
Exactly.
priorities, and they don't necessarily always come into alignment, right?
Right. Yeah, the
Is
other
there,
thing I'll just say real quick, because I have been
sure.
studying this, my family's background's from Lithuania in Eastern
Mm,
Europe. And one of my relatives is doing an interesting shared housing model. She bought an old apartment building and she made like clusters of units. It's sort of like shared housing where there will be like one common area and four individual units around it. And it's for low-income seniors.
mm,
And it has two goals. One is to kind of provide more social aspect, like instead of
sure.
isolating seniors to bring them together, give them privacy, but give them places to also, commune.
Mm,
So that's an interesting strategy. So I think part of the philosophy also could be a shift in how do we live?
mm.
Americans always have valued independence
Right.
and their
My
big
own
home
home, my own.
sets
Yeah.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
bigger is better, my own space. But,
Yeah.
I think that perspective may need to shift.
Mm,
Certainly when my grandparents came over from Eastern Europe, they shared a house with
right.
another family. So they were on one floor and then the other family was on the other floor. And I was like, wow, that's a brilliant strategy. And
Yeah. Sure.
that's something that might be able to be examined. But I think this idea that everyone has their own big individual house, that may not work for the crisis that we're in right now.
Certainly not. Yeah. And then you think about multi-generational housing. Like my family immigrated from Armenia, and the multi-generations all live together. Right.
Mhm.
But eventually, over time, to your point, the spawn of those became individual homeowners, right? And my parents became individual homeowners. I'm an individual homeowner. So, but in some cases, you look to back to those multi generations living together and whatnot, right? So, um, you had mentioned a minute ago, Tara, about some corporations offering some discounts and those types of things potentially, right? Without you don't have to name names here, but is there anyone in sort of the for-profit space, corporate or otherwise, kind of taking an initiative right now, or really showing leadership around affordable housing development?
Well, certainly there's lots of groups that are doing amazing things.
Mm,
In terms of trying to what I would consider leadership is trying to find solutions, right? And
mm.
in California in particular, it's wildly expensive to build affordable housing, and that's been a lot of the pushback.
Sure.
So trying to solve that issue, both from a public perception standpoint and governmental funding standpoint, is a key issue, right? We want to try to demonstrate that we're fiscally prudent with taxpayer dollars, that we can try to build faster because we're in a crisis. So I certainly do see some groups trying things. I think the verdict is still out a little bit as to whether those things will be effective
Mm.
solutions long term, but you can't figure that out unless you just start trying, right?
Right,
So,
right.
modular has certainly been a big conversation here in
Ah,
California,
interesting.
because,
Yeah,
if you build something in a factory in a controlled environment,
sure.
ideally, have fewer mistakes, can be done faster, no weather conditions, things like that. And then shrink wrap it and truck it to the site and crane it on there. So a couple groups are trying that. We
Mm,
are also trying that. I think for us, at least, the verdict is still out. It's under construction now, but
right,
it poses its own set of challenges, right? So I
right.
think if groups, do a lot more of it, then it could become an effective tool. But
Yeah,
you got to work through the kinks first, right? And
sure,
sort of
sure.
anecdotally, I've heard that they have to be big enough projects to have economy of scale to bring the
That
cost and time down.
that would make sense because even though the technology is evolving rapidly there, right, it's still expensive, I would assume, right?
Right.
And you would need those economies of scale or other things to offset that, or how do you get to scale, right? In
Yeah.
something like that would be challenging, right?
Which goes back to the political will thing. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Tara, before we let you go for today, I would love to hear some of your thoughts as if someone is listening to this and let's say they have a passion like you do, and they're interested in working in affordable housing development, or maybe they're even currently working in affordable housing development. You've got extensive experience here, both in the nonprofit and the for-profit space here. Any sort of free advice that you would give to anybody trying to blaze their way here? What are the kind of important things that you think they need to keep in mind?
Well, first of all, I highly encourage people, if they're interested in this as a career or profession, do it.
Mm,
It's, I can't say enough good things about it. It's stimulating, it's fulfilling, it's, obviously serving a public need. So,
right,
definitely, great in terms of your a career path and a lifestyle. Certainly, it does become a lifestyle.
right.
In terms of how to get into it, there's a variety of different ways. And I always tell people there's a number of different angles you can take. So, for
Mhm.
example, if you're interested in finance, finance is a key component of what we
Yeah.
do because we actually have extremely complex financing. So,
Mm,
you could enter it in that way through like the
mm,
community development division of a bank. If you're interested in the development, meet up with a few different development companies like ours. I meet with people all the time and, just sit down, tell them how to get into the industry, what are the different options. And people will find most, at least nonprofits, are willing to take the time to do that.
that's cool.
Because we want more people in our
Yeah, you
industry.
want more people to be involved. Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, because none of us can do it alone, and the
right.
need and demand is so great. So I would say we need more. We need
Mm.
everybody in here. You can certainly work at it from the design angle in an
Right.
architecture company focused on affordable housing. You can do the service angle if you're interested in the people part of what we do. Property
Mm,
management is another one.
mm,
If people want to, help oversee the buildings, that's,
mhm.
a different angle. So like you can really take the area that is most interesting to you and you can find a way to be in the affordable housing industry through that lens.
That's super. I mean, so lots of ways to get involved, right? It's not just sort
Mhm.
of like a unilateral path, like most things in life, right? There's so many different ways and a non-linear way that you can get involved, right? So
Sure. Yeah. And then there's policy and advocacy, there's community organizing. I mean, yeah, I could go on and on. So yeah. So, I would say, at least in Southern California, we have SCAMP, which I mentioned
right.
earlier. That is the membership organization of, gosh, probably all of the affordable housing developers in Southern California. So I always
Yeah.
tell people, go to that website and see what jobs are there. Start talking to those organizations,
Mm,
attend workshops, conferences. We have two big housing conferences a year in California. One is through Housing California and one is through SCAMP. And,
mhm.
you're talking over 1,000 people involved in this
Yeah.
industry.
Wow.
So it's a movement, right? It's a
Sure.
lifestyle for many of us. We've been doing this a long time. It's a great group of people who are passionate and smart and really caring. So you can go to one of those and just feel the energy and just meet people as well.
I really appreciate you that you just said that it's a lifestyle, right? So I appreciate that a lot because I think people need to have maybe a little bit of that mindset going in, right? That this is a lifestyle. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I find myself on vacation looking at different buildings and saying, "Ooh, I wonder if that's affordable or market rate." I mean, yeah, it really just becomes part of who you are in all the best ways.
Yeah, that's awesome. Tara, thank you for taking us through so many various aspects of your professional journey, the impact of the work that you and your organization are doing, and just your insights into the field of affordable housing and bringing more awareness to us. So thank you. And we wish you the very best of luck. And we'll be continuing to watch the work that you're doing in Southern California and sounds like beyond. So thanks again, Tara.
Thank you so much. It was really great talking with you. And please do put our website in the show notes so that people can learn a little more. If you're in Southern California, look us up. I'd be happy to show you some of our buildings.
We will take you up on that and we will make sure that folks have all your contact information. So thanks again, Tara. We'll talk soon.
Great. Okay, thanks so much. Great talking to you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.